welcome to Beauties and Beasties, the independent pest podcast of the UK.
Hello. I am back. How's everyone doing?
And I've got, is it 3 in a row for some reason? Sorry, guys.
It's all right. I mean, Hugh says he doesn't like being on this end of it, but I think what we're basically doing, Sean and I, is slowly sort of like getting Hugh into the hot seat. So there we go, getting him more comfortable. Loads of people on already. Hi everyone, how are you all doing?
It was a bit of an emergency, so hence I haven't got my flash background tonight.
To be fair, anyone who's going to be watching back on this, Hugh's little office actually looks so much like the Microsoft standard back placement. You wouldn't be able to tell either way. It just looks like that sort of like standard placeholder anyway. But there we go. No, it's nice to be back. I missed last week, out and about, couldn't get to a computer in time. So what did I miss? I hear you had the Bug Bucks guys on. It sounds like it was a really good show.
Yeah, Eric and Jake came on last week, and it was really good, really enjoyable. Nice to see our friends from the US, as we have another friend from the US today. So we've had a little bit of a run on over the pond for a while. So no, they were really good guys. They're really interesting. I think
who would have thought that our whole sort of like US run all started with Andy and Gabe, didn't it? All those well, I say all those years ago. It was almost a year ago, wasn't it? So there we go, Andy. This is all your fault.
And it blasted in from there. So it's been great. We've got coming up. We've got the guys from the Tales from the Crawl Space. So another across the pond episode, and I'm working on a few others. So hopefully there's going to be a few more to come.
How many US podcasts have we had on now? Is it 4? Ooh. We've had Andy and Gabe, that's Coast to Coast. We had Foster and Bruce, Foster and Cully, which was
Pest Posse.
Pest Posse.
Goat.
We've had Jasmine and Jenny, from Pestrogen.
Pestrogen. We've had the goat. The goat. Greatest of all time. Bobby Corrigan.
Bobby Corrigan. Oh no, I'm just thinking podcasts.
Podcasts. Oh, sorry, not just America.
Yeah.
So, what other podcasts have we had?
There's one more. There is one more.
There is one more.
Oh, of course, Bug Bucks. That was the fourth one. Bug Bucks.
That's what we were talking about. So yeah, that's been good. Oh. So hopefully we can get some more on, because I am told there are quite a few in America, but I don't know that they're more into the podcasty pest. But then there's a lot more pest controllers, isn't there?
There is. It's a much bigger place, to be brutally honest.
We'll find out in a minute.
Pleased. Yeah, I'm quite pleased with our little UK capture here, and all of our sort of like steadfast followers and listeners who tune in every Friday. Thank you ever so much. So go on then. Give me one big highlight from the week you've had so far, because I've not spoken to you or Sean all week. So I missed you last week.
Well, the highlights obviously coming on here and helping Sean out, because Sarah might know what it's like. Billy the bird has gone AWOL, shall we say. So I think that the guys are camping out underneath a tree, looking up at a bird that's looking down at them and going, "I ain't coming down, mate, till the morning." So yes, hopefully it's going to be all right. But I suppose that's the danger when you're flying things with little brains, and they think, I don't want to come back now. So I'm sure every
time anyone thinks about birds, every time anyone talks about birds, my first thought is it's going to disappear. Like I don't think I could deal with that. I don't know, like the stress of it would be too much.
Yeah,
And
it's like
so
you've got how much you got. I don't know how much they are, but 500 quid sat in a tree going, I'm not coming down. You can piss off. What do you do? And you got work next week with it, and you think, I've got to just sit here and wait. Do you get the deck chair out and a sleeping bag, and what do you do?
big ladder and a rake and a can-do attitude.
Catapult. Oh,
I don't think we should keep birds, Hugh. I'm just going to put it out there.
no, probably
With the
not.
people
Might
for
not be
this.
a good idea.
No dear. Oh well, we've got away from birds. We have a guest tonight who is far, yeah, as far away from birds as probably we could get, although he might tell us otherwise. And Jasmine, watching you from my horribly smashed up phone because I'm clumsy. So it sounds as though you haven't had a good week, particularly Jasmine. That's not particularly great. Okay. What else is this week? I mean, I've had a really busy week. We're in the middle of sort of like some really big projects at the moment, which is really quite fun. Again, nothing I can really talk about, but all please just sort of like be happy for me that I am having sort of like a busy and productive time at the moment, and that will all eventually percolate back to you guys, I promise, in one way or another. So there we go.
I have had a highlight. I have been promised wholeheartedly because you have something on that I do not possess.
Eh?
So for everybody watching that keeps giving Sean a hard time about not having a T-shirt, um, please. It does.
What?
It's a weird.
So Hugh's disappeared off. And while Hugh figures out his camera again, what he's trying to say is Sean has promised the both of us, because it's not just you guys that are giving him a hard time about these t-shirts. It is also us, because he keeps promising us that he has sent these t-shirts out. He has sent these t-shirts out. And this time he has categorically promised that he has sent these t-shirts out. So, Stuart, Billy, if you don't get your t-shirt, Jasmine, I mean, all the guests that have been on should have got a t-shirt by now. If you haven't got one, then please say. And Hugh and I will drive round to Sean's house and beat him with big sticks until he puts them in the post. That would be our promise. You know, you got us to 1,000 followers. We will go and beat Sean up with a
I
big
mean, got a
stick.
T-shirt. So you're not
Sorry for you.
alone, everybody.
So there we go. Right, shall we bring our first guest? Well, our first guest on, our main guest on tonight.
Please do.
Absolutely. So everyone, please welcome to the stage, Dr. Matt. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great. How are you two doing?
We're
Okay,
doing
when I
very
can get on the
good.
screen.
So, Matt, we all know a little bit about you. We know you from sort of like inventions. Actually, the vast majority, anyone in the UK that is a field biologist has one of your inventions in their kit bag. But before we get onto that, do you want to just tell us all a little bit about yourself? How did you find yourself in the world of pest management? What were you doing before that?
So I guess it's kind of a long story. I am a subscriber, so I get to hear all the stories of your previous guests. As a kid growing up, my dad was a school teacher, and in the summertime, he was looking for work, and he got a job as a pest control technician, doing summer routes to fill in for other guys when they were on vacation. And that kind of introduced me to the world of entomology. As a kid, I was always out there collecting bugs and found a fascination with the biological world. That took me to college to be a biology major. And then I learned in college, doing some undergraduate research, that I could actually advance my degrees for free in the US by going to grad school, which I didn't know was a possibility. So I went to graduate school to do some applied research in biological control. And I studied plant insect interactions with kudzu, which is an invasive weed in the United States. And then from there, when I was done with my degrees, I realized that I wanted to do something that was a bit more involved with people, because for 6 years in grad school, I was alone in a quarantine facility or out in the field cutting plants, and I needed more human interaction. And so the idea came to, look for jobs in the pest management industry. I applied to the same company where my dad had worked, and they took me on as a technician and then as the technical trainer for the company. So kind of a full circle realization there.
I have a question, because you are not the first of our guests to have mentioned having gone down the university route in order to actually sort of like find their way into pest management. And a couple of people have mentioned these applied entomology degrees, or these sort of like degrees in applied X, Y, and Z. So is there actually, through the education system out in the States, is there a pathway for, not maybe specifically pest management, but is it on the radar of the education system, is what I'm getting at?
In some universities, definitely, like University of Florida, Purdue University, they have programs that are dedicated to structural pest management. But a lot of the universities, even in the land grant institutions, they aren't necessarily attracted to the structural pest work, because it's not as sexy, I guess, as the basic research that brings in the big dollars.
Wasn't
It's interesting to say that. Oh, sorry.
Can you at one time do a degree with Purdue University over here in pest management? Because I think there was a guy called Nick Anderson that did it. And
there was
a
correspondence course that they held for a long time. I'm not sure if it's still something that's available, but for many people engaged in that as well.
Cool.
I mean, I'm sitting my ACE International at the moment, but I don't think that's quite the same thing. But with that, it's interesting, because in the UK, we actually don't, all of our training to get into the world of pest management is all done through independent organizations. The vast majority of the training is either delivered by consultants, by our distributors, or by our trade associations. We don't actually factor at all into the mainstream education system. There's no fast track, there's no sort of like side route. The closest yet, really speaking, is some of the environmental health courses, which are degree and university-based courses, will have modules and elements on pests, but it's like a week or a single unit in a semester, let's say. It's not a huge amount, and it's something we've been really trying to sort of like change a little bit, because we'd like to be a bit more sort of like, imagine how many more people we would attract to the industry if there was actually a pathway from that sort of like college, what we would call college, you would call high school level on. I mean, do you think it makes a difference to the pest managers out in the States, having that ability to pull from that sort of like pool of younger people?
It might. I mean, I think a lot of the people that go for those programs and graduate with a university degree in entomology end up getting the more technical roles within a company. So certainly that's attractive. In terms of the technician level, if you have a college degree, it's often more education than you would need to fill that role.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. There is an element, it's nice to know the differences between a variety of different cockroach species. It's not necessarily useful to understand precisely how the gubbins, and I'm going to use the word gubbins because I like it, what's on the inside. You'll be pleased to know that you've got me and Hugh tonight as opposed to me and Sean, because Sean hates bugs with a fiery, and I don't understand it, passion for sort of like entomology can get in the bin as far as he's concerned, but we are slowly converting him to it. So I'm pleased to have another entomologist on tonight, I must say.
Did you say you had an invasive plant? You were studying invasive?
Yes, we have many invasive plants, but the one that I was studying in graduate school was called kudzu. It originates in Japan and was brought over in the 1800s. Once it arrived here, people were planting it all over the place. It has these big leaves that is nice for creating shade. It has beautiful smelling flowers. Farmers thought that it was going to prevent erosion and then restore soil nitrogen because it's a legume. But then it took over and started growing everywhere, and it grows over all other types of vegetation, including trees. So it creates these dense mats of uniform vegetation of just one plant. And so the project that I was working on was looking to use insects from its native range to feed on the plant and reduce its efficacy at reproduction.
Because what do we
Is
get? We
why
get
you now have
Himalayan
a problem
balsam,
with
don't we?
Asian beetle. Oh, sorry, Hugh.
Oh, I was just thinking we get Himalayan balsam, don't we? That's our
We also get Japanese knotweed, which is similar
yes,
but
that's the
different. I
one as
just gave
well.
it a
Yeah.
Google there. So just out of interest, is this, I know you have a huge problem going with invasive species of Japanese beetle in the States. Please tell me that this is some kind of lead on from introducing these beetles to eat these, no.
Different introduction. So this process for biological control in the past was very loose. Different, individuals from like USDA could go over, collect something, say, oh, this looks good, it's feeding on this plant, let's bring it back. And then that would create a new invasive species. But now there's really strict guidelines. Things come over in quarantine facilities. They're tested in this what's called centrifugal system, where they test the host plant and then everything out taxonomically to see if it will feed on other plants related to the target. So for kudzu, a close relative is soybean. So we tested it on soybean, and once the insect fed on soybean, it was like, nope, you're going back. You're not a good candidate for this type of work.
You're going back.
That reminds me of.
I think there's quite a bit
back
like
to
that
the
going on in
incinerator.
America. Isn't there? Sorry. Oh, he said we'd steer clear of that. You're going back.
Have you ever seen that episode of The Simpsons where they have sort of like there's an invasion of something, so they release a whole load of lizards, and then there's a problem with the lizards, so they release a whole load of sort of like bobcats, and it escalates up to the point they're just like, what are we going to do? Well, I don't know. We'll finally just release the gorilla. But I mean,
Many cases of
that situation.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Well, you only have to look at Australia, really, don't you? They are the kings of releasing things with best. Now, have you heard the latest one that they did? I mean, this must have been a decade ago, and I thought this was probably the worst plan I've ever heard. In order to try and control European carp, which have got into their waterways, they intentionally released the hepatitis virus into waterways. Yeah, not thankfully not the human version of the hepatitis virus, but a hepatitis virus specifically to carp. But as we all know, and to quote Jeff Goldblum, nature finds a way. Just what could possibly go wrong with pumping, acres of rivers and tourist attractions with a modified strain of hepatitis? I mean,
yikes. Hopefully that went through testing as well, but yikes.
Also coming from the nation that released cane toads without much of a thought, released mosquito fish without much of a thought, they have form for just being like, this is a good idea, slap, and it not being a good idea. So
fair enough.
Yeah. But oh god, that made me think about something. There was something else I wanted to ask you, but no. Please continue a story. So how did you then, after dealing with your kudzu plants, how did you then find your way formally into pest management? How did that transition occur?
Yep. So I after grad school, I took a couple months off. I was traveling out of the States, and during that time, I was thinking I'd really like to work with people. I'd really like to help solve practical problems, not big problems that require years and years of research. And so I applied to jobs in the pest management industry, and then the owner, who happened to be my dad's student when my dad was teaching grade school, hired me, and I worked in the industry for about a year and a half, and then realized that I say again.
As a technician, as
a technician, and also a trainer. So trying to ride along with technicians and talk about identification and different management approaches to the critters that they were seeing. But yeah, I went through the regular training process and became an applicator. I know it's different. I've heard on the show you guys have a different approach with licensing and all that, but I did get my technician license and then worked in the company that way.
Cool.
Yeah, and then I realized that I was hoping to do more of that education and then also more formal research, and that's how I found the position with Cornell, where my program now is the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program at Cornell, and we're part of the extension service. So we do education and we do research that educates different audiences. In our program, we have folks that cover vegetable production, fruit, livestock, and then our team is the community IPM team, and we focus on issues that affect people where they live, work, learn, and play. And my focus is with the pest management industry and structural pests.
So as a technician over there, so you said you were a trainer. So as a technician over there, would you generally get trained within the company, or would you be sent away to get training somewhere else?
Within the company. So when you get hired, in order to be eligible to take a test for licensing, you have to have a certain number of hours that you receive as a new hire. That has to be documented and shown to the regulatory agency in New York. And then you can become eligible after you take a 30-hour course that gives the basics of pesticide application equipment and general pest information. And then once you obtain your technician license, you have a little more flexibility to use products than you would as an apprentice, where you have to basically follow someone around all the time if you're doing applications.
So there's nowhere that you could like send your technician to go and learn everything in a week and then take an exam at the end?
So some of it, and I'm sure others, if they're listening from New York, like Andy, they may know if things have changed recently, but you have to have in-person experience documented with somebody. And then also for the 30-hour course, you can do that online. You could do it virtually. I don't think it matters where you get that classroom training, as long as it's documented and then you take the test.
Cool. That's good. And so we had Neve Quinn on.
Yep.
And I keep seeing this extension. What's that all about? I don't get it. What is it?
So I guess it's not something that is found on your side of the pond. In the States, in the 1800s, there was a program to take university-based information and translate that into information that everyday people could use. And that's how the extension system was born. In each state, there's one university that's considered the land-grant institution. And in New York, it's Cornell. In California, it's the University of California. And each institution tries to reach out into the communities. There's often county-based associations that people can go to with their questions about farming or pest identification. There's a branch that deals with families and consumer services, so you can learn about cooking and nutrition and health. So the whole idea of extension is to reach from the university out into the community and make the information more practical.
Sounds a good idea. Sounds a bit progressive.
It works. We have to constantly document our efforts. So whenever we give a presentation, they want to know how many people we spoke to, how long we spoke to them, any impacts that were generated as part of that. So there is a need to sort of demonstrate that we're having an effect on people. But it is a really great system, and one that not a lot of people are aware of, in terms of, like, if someone has a pest in their home, they can bring this sample to their local office and have it identified, but people don't know that. And it's a good service because it's unbiased. They're not trying to sell anything. They're just trying to identify the pest for you.
So they would.
So I'm going.
They could.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, Alex. Sorry.
Okay. There is something weird going on, which is that, like, you and I have a lag going on the moment because we get around, like, it's really weird. I was going to say, like, on a bit of a tangent, I've been stalking you on ResearchGate, which, if anyone knows, actually is all scientists are communists at the end of the day, and they will rather share information than sort of like try and go through paywalls. So if you ever want to go and have a look at some really good research papers, and to get around the paywall or the pay blockade on that, ResearchGate is a really good one. But you did a fantastic paper on what was it called? The assessment of factors influencing the visitation of rodents at food distribution centres,
Yes.
which was quite a. Do you want to talk us through that one? Because that was a really nice little bit of research that you did there.
Yeah. So, in my career in the pest management industry, I've had the opportunity to work a lot with Bobby Corrigan, who I know was on the show previously. And one of the things that Bobby had talked about a lot was that in food facilities, the way that pest control is implemented is often based on these standard placements of devices every so many feet or meters, or however they're measuring it. They're placing devices every so often on an interval basis. And of course, as you guys know, that's not where the rodents are. That's not where their behavior is bringing them to, find food or harborage. So we wanted to ask the question of, whether that placement theory of spacing devices was actually contributing to successful management, or if we could provide some scientific evidence that this approach is completely ineffective. And as you can imagine, our results showed that the interval spacing was not effective because certain devices that were near attractive conditions were more likely to intercept rodents. And that was the case for interior devices if we're looking at multi-catch traps, or exterior devices looking at feeding on rodent bait stations. So, we now, a lot of the literature that is setting the standards or guidelines for these auditing agencies say that you could place your devices according to inspections, but a lot of people still feel more comfortable placing them at interval spacing and end up wasting a lot of time inspecting devices that will never have any activity. When we combined the results for all 610 devices that were included in the study, we had 12 sites. Some were in the metropolitan New York area, some were in Toronto, Canada. Those 610 devices, only 45% of them had activity in 1 to 10 years is when we had the data available from. So
Wow.
fewer than half of all devices had any activity, but technicians are visiting them every single time they're there. Now, I know you guys have had guests on talking about the remote monitoring. Certainly that would be a tremendous benefit for those types of accounts where they have to be set up according to yardstick measurements. But there's real evidence now saying that it's better to place devices based on assessment rather than just interval spacing.
Is that though just the perception of the client? I want a bait box every 20 feet, and I want one that side of the door and one that side, the other side of the door, and that's the way it's going to be.
That absolutely contributes to it. So even if the standards say it doesn't have to be X number of feet, customers feel more comfortable with that placement. They think they're protected because they see that, wall of devices, when that's just not where the rodents are moving. That's not how they behave.
Did I not see somewhere? I can't. I'm not sure whether you wrote it or no. That there was a certain directional a wall, a certain area, as in northwest, south, east. That's one wall was specifically normally more visited than others.
So Bobby had written an article about that in PCT magazine a long 10 years ago, but our results affirm that finding because we saw higher captures when devices were placed on south or west facing walls. And the hypothesis there is that even in wintertime, those walls receive more sunlight and may potentially be a little bit warmer than other walls, which would be more attractive to mice and why they would nest in those locations.
Was that specifically for mice or any visiting rodent?
That that information was for interior multi-catch traps for mice, and then exterior bait station feeding was also more abundant on west-facing walls only. So that could have been any type of mouse that was on the exterior, whether it's the Peromyscus mice or house mice or rats that were visiting those stations. We didn't obviously identify which critters were feeding on the bait.
Because you guys in America, you do have you do use like tin cats a lot more than we do over here, don't you? That's quite a common thing even in food premises, isn't it?
Yes, they're very common. I haven't visited the UK, so I'm not sure what their use is like, but they're very common indoors. Zero.
Yeah, zero. Yeah,
in the UK we have a couple of acts which really stand in the way of it. So we've got the Animal Welfare Act, which will probably be the primary one, which means that any animal within your care cannot be allowed to suffer. And as such, a tin cat, if you are unable to prove that you were inspecting it regularly, and of that we are talking within 12 to 24 hours of capturing that animal, you couldn't prove that you hadn't allowed it to suffer through either dehydration, starvation, or stress. So live capture traps are not used by professionals unless under sort of like some fairly significant circumstances, like we're dealing with a protected species. And usually then that's the advent of IPM, is basically we've allowed us to use cameras to view these traps. Generally speaking, I think the thing that most people use a live capture trap for will be for capturing foxes or things like that, much larger animals, certainly not mice. Just having a think then about your west facing wall, sorry, do you not think it could have something to do with simply just the angle of the sun, not necessarily the warmth, but this is a predator aversion tactic, which it
I lost you there for a second, Lex, but I think the question was about west-facing walls. I think it could be predator aversion as well. If there's less sunlight that is present in that area in the morning time when rodents are active, then it could certainly be the rodents trying to avoid detection by being on that west-facing wall.
I think Alex has disappeared for a second. He'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
So you'll have to put up with me. Back to the tin cat thing. So again, in the US, if you've got a food premises like a manufacturer, would you have the whole place covered with tin cats every, say, 20 meters or something? Or would you just not have baits?
No baits on the interior, although they're by label permitted. But yeah, usually it's just the use of these passive multi-catch traps that would intercept any rodents that happen to explore them. And they, the way that the guidelines had been written, they tend to be circling the entire perimeter. So one on every side of the dock door, and then all throughout the interior of the facility along the perimeter wall.
And how often would it be suggested that those traps are checked before you've sort of got a molten slurry of mice inside them?
I would think that it's typically on a monthly basis for pest professionals visiting them. So certainly you could have deceased rodents in there that are turning to that molten slurry. Some companies require visits from pest management professionals every 2 weeks, so that's less. But yeah, I mean, I certainly appreciate the perspective of the animals are suffering in there. They're dehydrated, they're freezing. So what is used for that kind of monitoring in the UK? Is it just snap traps inside some sort of protective cover?
No, if it was a food manufacturer, you would probably have a non-tox block in there, a non-toxic monitor that you might go back every month or so and then check them. And then if you find activity, you could either replace it with snap traps or with a toxic rodenticide, depending. Certain specifications, you can't have any toxic rodenticide in production areas, so you would swap it over with a snap trap probably. Or again, if you're going up a little bit, some pharmaceuticals and things like that, manufacturers, you might have a system where you've got snap traps that are digitally monitored, or other traps that are digitally monitored. Now, didn't used to be, but now more so. Previously, you probably just have the whole place swamped in small amounts of bait in bait boxes throughout the whole site. That's still okay, because if you could, depending on your specification, you could still actually say that it's due to imminent danger to human health. So therefore, you could long-term bait that in those types of premises, as long as you're following the label and following the specification for that specific site.
Right. No, I love the approach of using the non-toxics and then switching to an active, or just switching to a trapping station. I would love to see that adopted more in the US. Often, companies are just relying on having that active all the time and never, considering
it does need
approach.
to be quite a secure site.
Right.
You don't want somewhere that's going to get a problem and you're just going to go for non-tox, because you might come back after a month and think, shit, the place is running alive.
That the big thing with non-tox is non-toxic can be used as a pre-bait, to be used as a conditioner. It can be used as so many things. Like, it's such a fantastic tool, but unfortunately, more often than not, it's used incorrectly, as in people put 1 or 2 blocks into a bait box and then don't come back for 4 weeks to 6 weeks. And all that happens then is the mice come in, they eat those, or rats come in, they eat those blocks within the first 2 weeks. And then it's done nothing. It's done nothing but feed them on. They move to the next box, they move to the next box. And of course, if you've got a daisy chain of boxes down a building, it leads them closer and closer and closer to a door. So if you use monitors in the wrong way, not great at all. If you use them in the right way, they're a phenomenal tool. You catch them in the act, you precondition them to the bait that you want to use. And also, because they're not as heavily regulated and restricted as traditional baits are, you can put them in places that you would not necessarily consider putting a regular bait, to then condition those animals to eat from that food source. So when they do encounter your box, they are significantly more likely to actually engage with it. I can't talk enough about the benefits of monitoring baits. They are really useful, but it's such a divisive subject. Hugh has views on this, because we've spoken at length about it before.
Well, the ones that the type, no names and no trade names or anything, but the type that have no nutritional value, and they are just pure monitor, they don't eat them. They won't touch them. So if we could find something that was a monitor without a nutritional value, which is a digital box, but that would be good. And I don't personally, it's me, I don't believe in outside monitors, because I don't think that's necessary, or non-toxic monitors, because I think if you're doing your job properly, you don't need a monitor box to tell you that there's rats active on a site. You're going to get a phone call from the facility in advance saying, we've seen a rat running around the outside. Cycle back 20, 30 years ago, there were no such thing as outside monitors. You would use your field craft and you'd know what was going on. That's just my opinion. And I don't believe, because I think that the use of exterior non-toxic monitors will encourage things to come in close to the building, find a food source, and then move further on into the building if they can. Because we'd all shout at, you imagine a customer that dropped a little dog biscuit every 10 feet around the outside of their building. You'd be like, don't do that. That's not a good idea. And yet we're going to stick it in a nice little box and have a little restaurant for them. Come in here, have a feed here. Oh, look, there's a nice big building in there. Carry on. So that's an opinion, not a fact.
We could talk about this all night, genuinely.
Otherwise, I'll take over, and you've come to speak, not me.
I was like, I've got a question for you, Matt. So you wrote this paper on looking at the placement of boxes in food factories and the rest of it. And something that I was discussing the other day at PPC Live with another consultant friend of mine was in the UK, there is this trend that all boxes inside, all internal boxes are mouse boxes. Because of course you only get mice inside. But of course you don't just get mice inside, do you? You get rats. So there is this trend in the UK that internal boxes are mice and external boxes are larger rat boxes. But did you have a look at, did your study sort of like actually have a look at the different types of boxes as they were deployed inside and outside? You know, was there a bias towards one or the other?
So I think it's the same in the US, where internally, yeah, you're just trying to capture mice, especially in food distribution centers and food processing facilities. And on the exterior, it's bait stations that would accommodate rats and mice. In our study, one of the challenges with our study and other studies that we've tried to do is actually getting field sites. There's a lot of PMPs that work in different types of accounts, but having them bring in a researcher that's going to look at their data and maybe critique their program is not something that a lot of companies are interested in. And so it's really challenging for us to find sites. So for this project, we actually worked with two different pest control companies, and so they sort of have more uniform standards. So they were using the same type of equipment in all of their distribution centers, even though the accounts were different and might have had different specifications. The equipment that they were using was similar.
So cycling back just a little bit, do you mainly, I know you do integrated pest management as a whole, but do you mainly major on rodents now? I mean, I looked at all the papers that you've written, and there were so many there that I didn't go down through them all and see what you did.
Structural pests is my focus. I enjoy rodent work the most. It's the most fascinating to me. It's kind of what really got me into this industry and position, because I just love the biology and behavior of rodents. I do still do insect work. We've done some research looking at exclusion of overwintering pests. We've done some yellow jacket trapping experiments. We've done some tick research to understand distribution of ticks in different settings. So, we, as extension folks, we get a lot of questions from the public and from stakeholders, and we try to address whatever those questions are. But I try to focus on rodents.
So what would your general sort of day look like then, just out of interest?
So in the past, I would do a lot more site visits and hands-on education type things. Since COVID, we developed a lot more virtual type trainings and virtual learning materials, and because of that, it's almost like I've been stuck in a rut of doing a lot of desk work. So we're trying to break that cycle. We're trying to do more research and less resource development, so that we're getting back into the field and doing more hands-on education, as well as demonstration projects that relate to the various pests that we see.
I have a question. So, I mean, a lot of your papers, again, they focus on ectoparasites, disease transmission, zoonotics and the rest of it. There's been two big stories that have come out of the States recently, and I'm sure you know which two I'm going to bring up. I mean, firstly, tragically, Gene, was it Roddenberry? Sorry, but
Hackman.
No, Gene Hackman, that was it, sorry. Gene Hackman and his wife passed away from hand virus, which is wildly unexpected, because it's a disease we all talk about and a disease we all know. But I mean, Hugh, you did a bit of research on this, and you found something like, what, in the UK, 7 deaths over the last 10, 20 years or something, or 1 death, sorry, over the last 10 years. It's and the funny thing with that is there's a study done by these two gentlemen, Webster and MacDonald, in 1995 in the UK, and they found that almost of all the rats that they found euthanized and sent off a pathology on a farm in southeast England, 5% of those rats had hand virus, specifically Southeast Asian variant of that, which was wildly unexpected, but it shows that it is kicking about. but the transmission is relatively difficult. So we've got that, but also the latest news story that the H5 and H7 variants of bird flu have migrated across to, I think it's Rattus rattus, with fears that it's also potentially in deer mice and house mice as well. And that's a huge risk to the poultry industry and other livestock industries. So, I mean, as an entomologist, as someone who has dealt with zoonotic diseases, what's your take on this? Because it's something we in US and UK, we know about the diseases of rodents, but they're not really considered the big driving factor as to why we control them. It's the structural damage, it's the distress, it's the loss of reputation that we focus on, but not necessarily the diseases. And these two could really shake things up a lot.
Right. Yeah. And it's very frightening. The closer that researchers look, the more they find with pathogens. A couple of years ago, maybe in 2022, the CDC found that rats were also carrying, Norway rats in New York City were carrying COVID. So there's potential for these rats to really serve as reservoirs of these pathogens that can have devastating effects on people, especially when we talk about bird flu and how that's going to influence the poultry industry. Poultry farms and rodents go hand in hand. So the potential for rodents to be reservoirs and reinfest areas that were cleared of bird flu previously is a concern. So unfortunately, there's just not a lot of surveillance of these pathogens in the United States. And that's one of the messages that came out of our research that was published back in 2015 when we were looking at rodent pathogens associated with Norway rats in New York City. The last time that anybody had looked at Norway rats for ectoparasites was in the 1920s. And so over 100 years later is when someone else started looking at ectoparasites and the potential for disease transmission. So we see more and more cases of rodent-borne disease in the States. Leptospirosis is becoming more common. There's transmission of typhus in several parts of the States. So, it's almost like we're waiting for this time bomb to go off where something like bird flu or something like COVID is carried by rodents and really affects a large number of people because of that, their distribution.
I think Bobby said that, didn't he? He said that the guy that research guy that made the film Contagion, he was talking to him and he said it will only be a matter of time before it makes a pandemic disease makes the jump to rodents and they're carrying it.
Yep.
So I'll tell you a funny story, shall I? During COVID, Liverpool School Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, basically they were looking exactly what you and Bobby were looking at there, which was how many rats can carry COVID. What's going on here? Has it made that leap? And they approached the BPCA and said, can we have some help? We're trying to get hold of rats. We've been doing this project for about 6-7 months now, and we've caught about 8 rats. We're really struggling with it. We are researchers, not pest controllers. And I flippantly turned around and said, I could get you 200 rats by the weekend. And they said, no, you couldn't. And I was like, 200 rats by the weekend, I'll drive them up myself. And they're like, all right, sure, 200 rats by the weekend. Go for it, mate. Never going to happen. So I reached out, and several of the people that are listening right now are people that help me. And I said, guys, I'll pay you £1 for every rat that you shoot, okay, or the 50p rat. Go to your waste transfer sites now. Go to anywhere where there are sort of like loads of rats. On Friday, I'm going to start in the south of England, and I'm going to drive all the way up to Liverpool, and I'll stop and pick up. And I bought a whole load of beer coolers, like proper big beer, and just put all the seats down in my RAV4, put all the seats down, filled it with these beer coolers, travelled up through Basingstoke, through London, up to sort of Harrogate, across, picked up well over 200 rats, turned up at the door of Liverpool University, 200. In some cases, still warm rats in the back of my car. And these two guys just looked at me and they're like, we didn't actually think we were going to do this, and also we don't have enough room in the freezer, so they had to like run across the road and steal the freezer from the biology department. So we did that, but unfortunately the data that they got out of it took so long for them to analyze it. But it was only after sort of like the crest of the wave had gone did I get a call from them saying, you know what, we actually did find COVID in some of those rats. It was quite interesting, which only goes to sort of like vindicate the study from New York, which I think was in 2022, where they were found something like 14% of rats in sewers were carriers either biologically or mechanically of COVID. So that was it. Good fun.
You said that leptospirosis was on the increase. Why is that? Why would that be? Why do you think?
It could relate to how that pathogen is transmitted within rodent populations. And then, so in New York, for example, the sector of people that have been exposed are men that are hauling garbage. And as rats urinate, they urinate out the leptospirosis bacteria, and then people acquire that. So by touching and then touching their face or their mouth. So people that are exposed to that type of setting is how they're getting exposed more often than others. It's also very persistent in water. So in New York, there's been a couple of cases where dogs have died from drinking puddles and acquiring the pathogen via that route. And it could also be that people are more aware of it, and so they're testing for it, and that's how they've determined that that's what the issue is. There's a lot of knowledge now about the various pathogens that rodents can carry, but there's not great information about how often it's being transmitted. And people can come down with a fever and just think it's the flu or some other bug that's got them, but it could actually be a rodent-borne pathogen that's affecting them. So lack of diagnosis and lack of knowledge of the pathogens could contribute to why they're not as well known as they are prevalent in the environment.
And if you have a look at especially things like salmonellosis and E. coli, so those foodborne pathogens, they don't even require it to be a biological vector at that point. It's simply just a mechanical vector. And a lot of times you find these soft fruit and soft vegetable plants getting taken down because they wash them all down, and it's actually the water that they wash them in that has become contaminated. And conspiracy theories abound, but if you've got a small scurrying animal that can carry salmonella on its feet and within its feces running across your soft fruit and veg, it doesn't take that's not rocket science to be like, maybe right. There is a link here.
One of the pictures that I use in a lot of my presentations about the risks of rodents is one that I took under public housing, where there was a break in a sewer line. And so there's human feces and liquid and all that mixing together, and a rat that's standing over it. Sort of, you could see its reflection looking into the pool of cesspool there. They can drink that liquid and be perfectly fine, not get sick. But then when they poop that out, maybe there was E. coli, maybe there was salmonella. They're walking through it, and exactly as you say, Lex, they're mechanically vectoring those pathogens to the people living right above that crawl space. So
just like a slushy.
Nice brown slushy.
Rat slushy. Lovely.
I'm not coming for a barbecue around yours this holiday. No, not doing it.
I've got to ask before we forget. Come on, how did you come up with the inspection tool?
Yes. So I guess how and why. So that's a easy story. In 2015, we had two different working groups that were a group of scientists, pest professionals, industry representatives that were working to elevate the pest exclusion field, try and bring more science to that field, and maybe test some of the recommendations that have often been made about, what products are going to work for exclusion and what types of settings will they be effective. So listening to Bobby's presentations, he would always talk about, for mice, you want to look for an opening that's 6 millimeters, and he carries around his slide ruler or a pencil. People stick their pinky into holes that have urine and sebum and feces in them. So I was like, well, what if we had something that was didn't require measuring. You didn't need to pull out a ruler and actually know that it's 6 millimeters for a mouse to enter. You just probe, and if the probe fits, then so would a mouse or a rat. And I proposed this to Bobby. The working group that we had was called the Scientific Coalition on Pest Exclusion. And I said, what if we had this scope inspection tool and we can market this, and we can really get people to adopt this idea of pest exclusion and associate it with scope. And Bobby, sat there for a second, and he's like, this should have your name on it, not the Scientific Coalition. And, at that point I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess I could have an invention with my name on it. And then the idea came, well, if it's the Frye inspection tool, I could use fit. Hey, look at that. There you go.
There he is.
So fit, if the device fits into the opening, so can a rodent. So the acronym works great. We thought that it could include some other pieces of information. So the one end can help you differentiate gnaw marks. Not a lot of people know that the tool can be used in this way. When you get the tool, it's got the little card that tells you it could do that. So you can measure that, and then you can also differentiate rodent droppings using the other end. And I proposed this idea to Excluder, who's the manufacturer now. And, they kind of just like Bobby were like, this is a great idea. We're happy to work with you on this. Because I work for a university, if I wanted to make money on this and I wanted it to be my intellectual property, I'd have to sign all these agreements with the university, and they'd take, the 2 cents for every 5 cents that I made. So I decided that all donations would go to the Pest Management Foundation, which here in the States is the National Association for Pest Management folks. So it goes towards research, it goes towards education, and I have no conflicts of interest talking about it because I'm just the inventor, not profiting on the device.
Cool. And have they gone well?
It was a slow start, and now it's shocking. I could look at the numbers, but in the tens of thousands last year, people purchased these, which is so exciting to hear, because if they're purchasing the tool, it means that they're either educating about pest exclusion or they're selling pest exclusion services, which, if we're talking about pathogens and we're talking about contamination or anything else with rodents, if we can keep them out, we don't have to worry about all of those things. We don't have to worry about ectoparasites being on dead rats in your wall because they never got in the first place if we exclude them. So we've seen schools and building facilities managers, pest professionals, all environmental health inspectors, all different walks of life using the tool to educate about rodent entry points and exclusion, which is very exciting.
I think the thing is, because it's actually a specific tool, customers take it that the tool is right. Whereas when you get a pen and you go, look, a rat can fit in there, they go, it's a pen. But if you have the fit tool and you go, look, this is a specifically made tool, and this is look, it goes in, and they're like, oh, okay. And a couple of times or a few times we've used it. You take a photo of a pen underneath a door, and it's like, it's a pen under a door, isn't it?
Right.
Go on, Alex.
I have a question, because this actually came up the other day. We give this figure of a mouse can fit through a gap smaller than 6 mil, and a rat can fit through a gap smaller than 20 mil, but it can expand a gap greater than 10 mil with its teeth. Now, I actually tried to find the original citation that research came from, and it's very difficult. I can't find it. I mean, the closest I could find was an old Rentokil library book that referenced it, but made no reference itself to how it found this information out.
Right.
So when you actually made your device, where did you base those measurements on? Or did you simply just base them on conventional wisdom? Or did you do research yourself to establish that is the size that a rat can fit through and a mouse can fit through?
That is a great question, and one that a lot of people take for granted. They just accept that a mouse can fit through that 6 millimeter hole, which is extremely small, right? So That is not the size of an adult mouse skull. An adult mouse is not going to fit through a 6 millimeter opening. I did base the tool on conventional wisdom, but then also reviewed papers that were looking at the morphometrics of mice and rats. And you know, the sizes of adults are much larger, but the size of juveniles and pups can be that small. And so it's not that they will fit through, it's not likely for an introduction to start if you have an opening of 6 millimeters or less. It's that if you seal to 6 millimeters, you will prevent all life stages of rodents from getting into that facility. So it's a super conservative estimate of rodent entry. If we wanted to make it less conservative, we might have to expand the tool significantly to show the actual size that a mouse could fit through or a rat could fit through. But we thought keeping it to the conventional standards that are used when people refer to pest exclusion is a good way to, you know, reinforce what's been noted in the literature. That's
got to be the word of the week, though, before you say anything, Alex. Morphometrics. That's definitely the word of the week.
Does roll off your tongue.
It is a good word. Now, I'm just going to throw this out there for fit 2 or 2 fit. If you could potentially make it tapered, couldn't you? So you could have a narrow end for the juvenile stages and a thicker end for the average rat size, and then you could literally risk rate it. You know, if you could taper it down and say, right, if you do this, your risks are low. If you leave the hole this big, your risks become incrementally larger as you allow for more and more of the population to get in. Now, I'm not saying that I want any kind of like kickback from this, but when you do make fit 2 and you do make it with the incremental sizes on there, I don't know, find some way to fit my name into that. That's all I ask.
Okay. Hey, fit. I like it.
we have be called the Wade wedge, though.
The Wade wedge. Hey.
Wade wedge. That sounds like a that sounds like a 70s dance, that does, or it sounds
the Wade
like
wedgie.
The Wade wedge. No,
we have talked about version 2 and what modifications we could make. We talked about even molding an actual rat or mouse skull on the end so that people could really visualize what it would look like to have that rodent skull go through. But we thought maybe that wouldn't be a selling point for every customer. No one would want to carry a skull in their pocket, but I think a lot of people would. So version 2 has yet
also
to
look like
be
a
decided.
shaman, wouldn't you?
The rodent shaman.
Shit at Harry Potter. Yeah. That's I know it's amazing at that, and it's amazing how these like little devices can have such, and I don't mean to diminish it what you say by little devices, but these devices which seem so innocuous can have such a huge impact on what we do in terms of because it's exactly as Hugh says, because you have that conventional wisdom. You could show it with a pen, you could show it with a screwdriver, you could show it with a rolled up bit of cardboard, but the fact that it is a formed and molded tool and it's a profession and then falls into the realms of professional means that actually people are a lot less likely to argue the point with you if there is something that is standardized to our industry. And so it's a great thing, and I think that's why it sold 10,000 units last year, is because it adds that element of respectability and credibility to our industry.
And I have no ego about it. I totally think that it's such a basic idea that I was really shocked when we learned that nobody else had come up with something similar, because I guess everyone's just relied on their pinky finger all this time. So.
And the fact that we get them over in the UK as well. I mean, that's traveled quite well, isn't it, really?
It has. It has.
A lot of the excluded products we are getting over here, and we have had for a while. So, that's really good. Really good.
Do you have a special one? Like, I mean, or do you just have a bog standard one off the shelf? You've got to tell us. Do you have like one? Yeah, gold-plated one. Like the first one.
That would be amazing. No, I just have the standard one. I know they brand them. We've never branded them for our company, but I've been at a trade show and someone handed one to me as just a participant in the trade show. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. Someone just gave me my own invention. I do have a little shadow box here that I keep at my desk that, I don't know, I know not everybody could see it. It shows the different iterations of, you know, the original
Cool.
design made out of wood. One of the designs had this ruler that also had, you know, the teeth marks and tooth impressions on it to show differently how, you know, different ways that we could have designed the tool. The blade would also be used to show insect entry points, but I think it's pretty standard. You know, if it's the thickness of a credit card, an insect is going to get in, you don't really need to measure that. But the mouse and rat openings were pretty informative.
So do you get involved in, is it the East Coast Rodent School that Neve Quinn does? Do you get involved in that at all?
I
That's
haven't
the West
taught-
Coast Rodent Academy.
West Coast,
Correct.
sorry.
She does a rodent academy. There's a Texas Rodent Academy. There's Bobby's, which was the original rodent academy out of New York City. There's the Washington, D.C. Rodent Academy. There's the University of Florida. So there's a whole bunch of them. I haven't taught in any of those yet. Bobby's invited me to speak, but it hasn't worked out. But everybody has their own flavor of Rodent Academy now, which is terrific. They're often a multi-day training series that give PMPs hands-on experience learning about rodents and then going out into the field doing rodent surveys. It's a really fantastic course.
Would that be run by the extension then, or is that a commercial thing, or how's it work?
I think in most states it's run by a land grant university. So Neve does hers as part of the University of California, Texas A&M, University of Florida. I believe the one in Washington, D.C. is run by the Department of Health there. So that one is a little bit different. Just like Bobby's is run by the New York City Department of Health where he works. So different organizations put them on. There's no standardization for what goes into the course or who teaches the content, but Bobby certainly teaches a lot of them. He gets around to a lot of the different rodent academies.
So where do you see rodent control in America going in the next 5 to 10 years? Because you've got you've got bromethylin, haven't it, in California, and some pretty dodgy shit going on over there. So
yes, it's very tricky times ahead of us. I think there's the federal government is looking to restrict the second generations to make them a restricted use product. We don't know what's going to happen with that decision because, with the previous administration, they had one view on pesticides. This administration may have a different view. And so that could actually affect what happens with that decision. That would really take rodenticides out of the hands of homeowners, which in my opinion is something that needs to happen. Homeowners have zero training on how to apply rodenticides, but they can get the same active ingredients that someone that's gone through training and education to apply those products. Even if they're in lower quantities, they could just go back the next day and buy even more. So definitely something that I see as a benefit to reducing exposures and non-target effects.
So what was the last government's view on pesticides then?
They were more likely to be strict on regulation. So with that administration, it probably would have been more likely for the products to go restricted use. Now it's not clear what that decision will look like.
I think
it's interesting you say that because in the UK, we haven't got a license, of course, but we do have some very clear legislation through the biocidal products and through a couple other bits of legislative work. So if you are a member of the public, you can still buy rodenticides, but you can only buy 300 grams at a time. coupled with the fact that you can only buy half strength bait. You can only buy sort of like the half dose. So you can't buy anything above 30 parts per million. So most of the general public products are 25 ppm and limited to 300 grams, or sold in self-sealed tamper evident boxes. So that's one way, and they tend to be hellishly expensive at the same time. You know, it's almost 3 times the price, weight for weight, to the general public than it is to a professional.
Sure.
So that's kind of how we're trying to steer it. But
everybody's, rather than using bromadiolone and difenacoum, they've all plumped for amateur use to be brodifacoum, because you can get away with using it at 0.25%, a lot better than you can using difenacoum and bromadiolone at 0.25%. So there's been a huge shift in types of second gens available to the amateurs. Is that correct, Alex?
Yeah. Although it's not 0.25%. That would be a terrifying brodifacoum. I mean,
no,
you would be able to roll a village over with that. 0.0025%.
25, yeah.
Do you have? In the UK, can people go to like a farm store and buy rodenticides? Because that's what people can do here as well, where, you know, even if you're from the public, you can go and buy a bucket of bait from a farm store with no license.
So I'm going to tell you what should happen, and Hugh is going to tell you what does happen. So what should happen is, if you were to go into a farm store, if you were to want to buy a professional level of rodenticide, that's to say anything greater than a 3 kilo pack at 50 ppm and above, you would need to provide evidence to that retailer at point of sale that you had taken, at the very least, what is called your safe use of rodenticides course, which is a level 2 qualification. And that takes 1 day, and it's aimed primarily at people getting into the pest industry, or untrained professionals such as farmers and gamekeepers. So it should stop members of the general public just buying 3 kilos of 50 ppm bait and windmilling it across their garden like some kind of like medieval trebuchet. And that's what should happen. However,
just get your mate to buy it, don't you? The farmer down the road that's got his ticket buys it for the whole village and just buys a ton of it and then dishes it out willy-nilly. Really. And
so farmers do have to take this safe rodenticides course in order to see. In the US, farmers are completely untrained because it's considered their property, so they can apply any pesticide they want without restriction, as they can purchase restricted use products and use it on their own property.
So they may well do the course, but they still do it like in the way that they've done it for the last 30 years. It is irrelevant whether they've done the course or no. They still, when they're stacking their straw, they still bag it up in bags and chuck it in between the straw, because they don't want the straw. We have bales of straw with strings on them, and the rats and the mice chew the strings and the straw falls apart. So they still bag bait in all their bales of straw to try to prevent that. Regardless,
it is getting better. I'm not going to lie that it's perfect, but it is getting better. If you go back even 10 years, it was radically different. Since the advent of what we call crew stewardship in 2015, it has got better. You can't deny that
it's getting harder for us as professionals. I can't say that it's getting any different for the farmers at all.
I'm trying to be positive here. We are moving in the right direction.
Try all you want, Alex, but to take safe use of rodenticide every 5 years, with the massive changes that are happening, every 5 years is a little bit of a nod and a wink, isn't it, really?
this has become our Asian hornets. This has become our Beetlejuice moment. If we talk about CPD or CE, continue education units, more than 3 times, fire, brimstone, arguments.
Fair enough.
And we have a guest.
So
So we need the guest to talk and not me and you.
So that's the rodenticide part. I think, you've had guests talking about the remote monitoring systems and sort of the digital rodent realm. I think that those are going to become more common too. It's always interesting to hear the different perspectives on what type of technology people like best. I like the discussion with Adam, where you guys talked about the different types of products. So some are just visual, some are recording activity, some are still monitoring, some are still actively managing. So some aspect of that is going to be a part of the rodent management landscape, and maybe all of it. And that's the beauty of integrated pest management, is that all of those tools can have a place in helping to figure out where rodents are and more effectively target their populations for management.
So do you have a lot of systems available, digital systems, because America is so big? Are there lots of, and you're very well known for your tech, Silicon Valley and everything. Are you having lots of systems pop up all over the country?
I personally have not done a lot with the remote monitoring. I know that there were a number of systems, and then it seemed like they were all pushing to get to the next generation. And then all of a sudden everybody sold their content because they weren't seeing the return on investment. PMPs were not adopting it. It's a great tool and great technology, but if you can't sell it to the companies that are going to have to sell it to their customers, then you're just not going to get the adoption. So, there's a couple companies now that are sort of rising, that are holding on to their products, that are working towards the next generation, and those are going to be the ones that are going to make, be more successful at having a place in the market.
That's kind of it, isn't it? I mean, we have this issue where it's a new and emerging market, and there's some really exciting stuff, as you said there. The stuff that we were talking about, Adam, before, and all of the others there. When I was at Pest World, there was almost as many smart solution stands as there were manufacturers and distributors. But the problem comes is because it's not a rapid adoption, it's so bloody expensive. And off the back of that, you really need, the irony is it needs to go to the FM markets. It needs to go to the home and garden markets first, so they can make 1 million units. So when we want to buy our poultry sort of like a couple of tens of thousands, we're not having to pay over the odds. It's a shame, because there's some great stuff there.
And what do you think about California and their bromethylene products?
I mean, so I'm in New York. Usually restrictions start in California and then they roll across the country to New York, and then they spread from there. So I see New York sort of following the train of, even if it doesn't occur at the federal level, there may be restrictions at the state level that will require the use of non-second generation or non-anticoagulant rodenticides here in the state. I heard Bobby give a talk last week or the week before about his research that he did in writing the next chapter of the Malice Handbook. And he went into great detail about all the environmental exposures that are being observed with second generations. And it is frightening to think about every aspect being touched by second generations. And much of that is likely attributed to homeowner use and untrained people using the products. So I don't see the structural pest management industry as contributing to that, because at least in the States, it's such a regulated community. Products are in containers that are, considered safe when they're used appropriately, or they're used indoors. I mean, those things aren't contributing to outdoor exposures of birds of prey, or getting into the water, or getting into livestock. It's the applications by people that have no training in rodent management, that are just using them in a way that their friend told them to use it, or they read on a post online. So it's unfortunate that regulation has to be implemented in order for people to use things correctly. Communication.
Tia says it's a communication issue, and I believe that as well. It's trying to, and by that, my take on that is we need to communicate the importance of the professional, the trained professional pest manager, the PMP, the PM, the PMO, the PCO, whatever you call yourself, and whatever region you're listening to from this. We are the stalwarts. We are the people that should be responsible for taking that pointy end of the stick and being responsible for, waving it around in the air and not taking each other's eyes out with it. Because we are dealing with dangerous chemicals. There's no getting around it. They are dangerous. They're intended to be dangerous. We can't make them safe, inverted commas, because the purpose is to kill something. And so there needs to be an element of responsibility and accountability with that, which we are not seeing potentially with these other user groups, as you said there. But my personal, I am terrified of bromethalin. I think it's a really scary compound, and I shudder to think the days that it may or may not reach the British shores, because there are, you talk about AVKs and non-AVKs. It's not like it's AVKs and one other. There's a plethora of other non-AVKs out there that are just as effective, have their places, and can do everything else. Just please not bromethalin. I mean, have you used bromethalin?
I have not.
Oh God, it's scary.
It wasn't a product that was being used when I was working in the industry, and since then we haven't tested it in any capacity. But I've seen what happens to rodents when they're exposed. I've read the reports of what can happen to dogs when they're exposed. I mean, it's scary stuff, like you say.
But yeah, it's from one
right,
from one extreme to the other, isn't it? All because of it. Was it a dead mountain lion in California? Was it a coyote or a mountain lion?
They've found rodenticides in coyotes and mountain lions in California, birds of prey. So they take a very strict stance on pesticides. They have regulated pyrethroids very strictly as well too, because of the risks that have been documented.
The bunny hugger cat.
What are the risks?
Just the application risks of them being applied, for example, over impervious surfaces and then washing into waterways and causing harm there. So detections in waterways in California, I think, was what led to their more strict interpretation of or restrictions on those products.
It's a shame, because pyrethroids, it's such a broad class. There's a lot of very interesting ones. There's some of the diphenothrins you can get cis-trans isomer ratios on, which have such low mammalian toxicity that they use. That's the ones they use on planes to take out mosquitoes, and you literally walk down a plane spraying it in front of people, and people don't even sort of bat an eyelid. There's such a world of chemistry with the pyrethroids. It's a shame to have them restricted.
So as we come to the sort of end of the podcast, Alex's favorite question seems to be at the moment, have you got anything that you'd like to ask us?
Ooh.
You don't have to, of course.
No, I didn't think of anything ahead of time. Like I said, I am a subscriber. I do listen, and I enjoy what you guys are doing, and I do like hearing the different perspectives of folks across the states here, but also from your neck of the woods. So, there wasn't anything that came up as a question that I would have had in advance.
Cool.
I've got one. So you've said you've been listening to the perspectives of UK pest controllers and US pest controllers and back and forth. So my question to you would be, before we get to the last three, what do you think from listening to those two use groups, what's the one thing that the UK could learn to do better from the US?
Ooh. So that's hard for me, because when I hear your practices and your sort of even ethical approach to rodent management, and I think it was in the conversation with Bobby that you had, the approach to pest management in general there, I feel like, is very focused on protecting people, protecting the environment. And in the US, sometimes I feel like that isn't as evident as it is in the UK from an ethical and ethos standpoint. So I guess the difference that I do here is that there's no licensing in the UK, and I do feel like, I know that's a huge hot button issue for you guys, but it would really elevate people to have a license associated with their business. It makes it easier for customers to know that the company they're hiring has undergone training, that they have the experience that they're saying because they can document it. That's a very like customer focused approach in finding the right vendor for your needs at home. So that's the only difference that I really see that we're doing here in the States. Every state is different. So in New York, there's a 3-tier system. In other states, there's not that same level of requirement. Even, neighboring states to New York have much easier examinations to get that license, but everybody has to have some level of licensing, which then translates to what products can be used. If you're an applicator, you can use these restricted use products. If you're a technician or not licensed, then you only have access to these products. It also gives them opportunities for business. So, and this is probably true in the UK as well, but if you have your license and you're a registered business, then you could apply pesticides in a restaurant or in a commercial account, whereas someone just working there can't apply those products because they're not a registered business with a license.
There we go. I am all for some form of licensing. And this is why I love this podcast, because we can have some solid yin and yang sort of like disagreements on this. But it's, I sit on one side of the fence and Hugh sits on the other, and it seems that Sean jumps between which one. Where's Sean at the moment on licensing, Hugh?
I think he's leaning that
On your side
towards, but it just depends who comes up with the license and how it gets developed.
I think that's the big fear. Conceptually, the idea of a license is great. The implementation, the practicality, I think, is where a lot of people are a little bit more hesitant. But I don't know. Back to your first comment, it actually sort of like fills me with a lot of pride that one of the things that you've taken away from our conversations and our discussions is the UK's, attitude towards environmental stewardship and public safety, because I think that is the reasons that obviously everyone does work to make a living. They do work to sort of like put a roof over their heads, to afford a nice holiday, and to sort of like buy fast cars and whatever. But at the end of the day, that's one reason. But the fact that we translate across that the other reasons are those actually really warms me. So thank you for that. That's really made my evening. Thank you.
And it's not something that I would have learned without the podcast. So that's why I appreciate the perspective that you guys have of grabbing people from the States, but then also from other parts of the world.
Cool.
That's perfect. That's so good. Well, I mean, I think that neatly brings us on to the last 3 questions, doesn't it, Hugh?
Yep, fire them up. Oh, where are they? There they are. Have you enjoyed your time on the podcast?
Of course. Yeah. No, it's great to talk to you guys. It's neat to be in the hot seat instead of just listening. I won't be able to listen to this because hearing myself speak is terrible, but it's been really enjoyable meeting you guys.
Yeah, you can catch up on Spotify.
That's right.
You absolutely have done yourself and your nation proud. I don't think you've got anything to worry about. You should definitely give it a listen back. But with that, can you give us a shameless plug, which I understand more and more often is something you shouldn't really be saying to an American audience. But what we mean is, if there's one thing that a pest controller would wake up tomorrow and buy or do or engage with, what would you like it to be?
the low hanging fruit for me to say is to go out and get, spend the $2.50 and get yourself a fit tool. So you could start demonstrating to your customers that they have entry points, and that's why they keep getting rodents, and also to maybe sell exclusion and add exclusion to your company profile.
That's a cool one.
That's a really good one. It's really good. I like that.
Straight and to the point. We like that.
It's also, I don't think we upsell or cross-sell proofing enough. It seems to be on the list of recommendations, but I think we could actually, as an industry around the world, probably push proofing a lot harder than we currently do.
Do you call it proofing in America, just quickly?
No, it's
usually exclusion.
Called pest exclusion. Yep. And yeah, I agree. I mean, even if you're just carrying a fill fabric, a stainless steel or a copper mesh to fill small holes, or some kind of elastomeric sealant, I mean, it's something that if you can mix pesticides, you could fill a hole that's 1 inch or smaller. So yeah, I think everybody could start there. And then if the business model works, then you scale up to doing larger openings and different types of proofing.
Cool. And so if you had to see somebody come on the podcast, have you got anybody that you'd like to see come on?
I can send you a list of people that I like, that I think would be good. But the one person that comes to mind would be Mike Bentley from the National Pest Management Association. I think that a perspective from the national group would be really awesome. And he actually has a podcast too, so you could add another US podcast to it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, I just wanted to say, I was going to say thanks for coming on.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely great.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. And like I say, it's really nice to speak to someone who it's bringing the real academia behind pest management to people, because it's something that happens, but it's not something that I don't think is necessarily put front and center nearly often enough, that folks like you are behind the scenes generating this information, because it's that information that is then used by, for want of a better word, politicians and lobbyists to help defend our industry, to prove why it is so important. So the work that you do, for me personally, invaluable, and thank you very much for basically working hard to keep our industry alive and credible in a way that probably a lot of people don't even realize that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for watching.
See you next week. Bye.
Take care. Thank you for listening to the Beauties and Beasties podcast.